Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome. I am a white woman with long wavy hair. I'm wearing glasses and I'm wearing a shirt that says #WhyISign with a blazer. And my background is whitish, beige. I am so excited to welcome all of you to this session by Boston University Wheelock Space Office Webinar Series, Strategic Partnership and Community Engagement. This is truly instrumental to engage. This is community engaged scholarship, learning and research. The research directly impacts and benefits the community. It makes a difference. Today's topic is learning their language, how parents of deaf children learn to sign. This series was created to showcase the impactful research of Boston University Wheelock faculty and their partners from other leading research institutions. Through a series of compelling conversations, these sessions will translate cutting-edge scholarship into accessible, practical knowledge, fostering stronger connections between researchers, policymakers, and community practitioners, as well as families. So bridging all of that, because our research impacts those constituents. I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Stacy Abrams, and this is how you sign my name. I established #WhyISign about a decade ago, about 10 years ago, to share stories, the power of stories and why we sign, to help hearing family members understand the impact of language so that we can connect and engage to deaf individuals, community members, their children. I am who I am. It's twofold. First, my parents are hearing, but they did acquire sign language and they engaged with the deaf community along their journey. Even though I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, my parents had the right attitude. Their attitude was just receptively learning sign language. And I'm thrilled to provide this #WhyISign, and I'm thrilled to be a moderator today. So in terms of my everyday work, I'm a project manager at the CLUR Center at Gallaudet University. I'm also a parent of 2 teenagers. One is in college and one is in high school, and they are both deaf. Currently, I'm excited to introduce 3 individuals joining us here today. We have Amy Lieberman, we have Elana Pontecorvo, and Julie Mitchiner. So we're going to talk about parents acquiring sign language. We'll talk about evaluating sign skills as parents acquire the language and communicate with their deaf children. We'll discuss this research and discuss experiences as hearing parents with their deaf children and the challenges that they may experience with this concept. It's not easy or convenient for all families to acquire language. So we're here today for 30 minutes to discuss those 3 items. And then we'll have a Q&A and opportunity. So I'm really excited about that. Feel free to incorporate your questions in the Q&A box, your name. If you prefer to sign your question, please indicate so, or you can just go ahead and do that in printed English. If it is an American Sign Language that you'd like to ask your question, we'll go ahead and welcome you as a panelist to share your screen and ask those questions. So without further ado, let's get started because I know we have several questions. Let's welcome our panelist here. Awesome. Well, we are all here. If you could just introduce yourselves, talk about your role and why you're engaged in this research. Let's go ahead and begin with Julie.
Certainly, I'm happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Mitchiner. I am faculty here at Gallaudet University, as well as a researcher. My focus is on deaf education and early childhood. So first, also let me share a visual description of myself. I'm a white woman with blonde, dirty brown hair, wearing glasses, an olive green shirt, and a black cardigan. I have a gray background and a red desk to my left.
Okay. Amy?
Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Amy Lieberman, and a visual description of myself is that I'm a white woman and I have brown, wavy hair. I'm sitting in my office with a white top and a blue blazer. I have several books and pictures behind me. I'm a faculty member here at Boston University in the Wheelock College of Education, and I currently work at the Deaf Center, hosting research on language and language acquisition as it pertains to deaf children and education.
Wonderful. Elana?
Hello, everyone. I'm Elana Pontecorvo. I'm currently a PhD student at Boston University. And to provide a visual description of myself, I'm a white woman. I have long brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt with a dark gray jacket over top or sweater. Behind me is a plain white wall, and to my left is a dark brown curtain. I've been a part of this research project for some time as a PhD student. And in that capacity, I've been able to take part and support a number of different projects. This happens to be one of the very first projects that I was fortunate to be a part of, so I feel quite blessed.
Outstanding. Well, now the fun begins. We're going to dive into the research. Let's begin with our first question. First, why did we choose to research this topic? What is the significance of this study? And to the field of deaf education and early intervention, if you could discuss a brief background on deaf education and early intervention in the United States. And Julie, why don't we begin with you?
Certainly, I'm happy to. As you know, babies and children are 100% dependent upon their caregivers, those who are in their environment to provide accessible language input day and night. We know that deaf children are born, 90% of which, to hearing parents. And so we are curious about how to encourage their language acquisition when oftentimes the baby is the first deaf person that these parents have ever met. There is quite a bit of controversy there has been over the years on which is the best way to educate your child and how they can acquire language. Is it a one-size-fits-all? Is it with the use of a visual language, a spoken language, which modality, and the like? But what we see is that there's a lot of misconception out there in telling parents that you'll never become fluent. Whether or not you try to learn the language, don't even bother, honestly, because even the medical field is encouraging them to put their hands down and only speak and encourage their child to lip read, only thinking of sign language as the last resort if spoken language is not acquired. This puts parents in such a predicament because they have the interest and desire to learn with their children and to support them. But what this induces, unfortunately, is this language impoverished environment where these children are growing up language deprived. That said, we do have a fair amount of research showing that if a child is provided equitable and accessible language input from birth, that they're able to develop on par with their peers who are not deaf. So regardless of what family they're born into, if they're born into having deaf parents or not, there's a lot of research out there to show that the effort is worth it when these parents who don't know sign language do try and acquire it too. Our work in looking at parents who have children who are deaf shows that there's a real lack of research on deaf parents. And what is it that's so interesting that they do for these children? What gift are they giving? And our curiosity was, what can we leverage from these innate environments to encourage parents who are not deaf to also employ? Again, as a counteract against the misconceptions that are out there and held by a good number. So that's sort of the impetus and some of the backstory to the research.
Great. Well, does anyone have anything to add to that? If not, we'll move on to the second question here. How did the research team form, and how did you design this study to align with those goals here? Amy?
Hi. Yes, this is Amy. I'll take that question. So it's a little bit fun if you think about Julie and myself had come together and we decided that we realized Actually, it was about 25 years ago, if you can believe that. We were co-teachers at the Laurent Clair Center, and we were working in the deaf education program at the time. And when we had come together, the idea that hearing parents could learn sign language was still in its infancy. But at that time, we were looking over whether or not deaf children in our classroom, some of whom had deaf parents and some with hearing parents, some were acquiring language in sign language, some were utilizing spoken language, but all of their families were truly committed to utilizing ASL at the time. And so, with that information, we kept that in the back of our minds, and Julie and I started to think, many years later, we were coming back together, and we thought, now that we're both in research roles and we both had the opportunity in our positions as faculty, that it would be worthwhile to study the fact of whether or not and how we can understand whether or not hearing parents can learn sign language and what that looks like in terms of challenges, in terms of how we can support those parents, and how we can learn from parents who, quote unquote, have become successful within their learning. So we designed our study in twofold. It had two steps. The first step that we approached was that we asked families where it was that they were learning ASL, what opportunities that they had, and what types of supports that they found helpful. And as well, we asked about challenges. We wanted to know about their beliefs and their belief systems as it pertains to what motivated their decisions to want to acquire and learn American Sign Language. We decided to host a survey, and we designed this survey in a way that we could disseminate it out to families, and we advertised that throughout social media and in different ways that we could connect with parent groups. We invited families to participate, and many did respond. Total, we had about 100 families in approximation, and that was our step one. Now, thinking about step two, several years later, we were very fortunate that Elana was willing to join our research team as a PhD student, and she had an overlapping interest in this topic. When the three of us got together, we were able to design a follow-up study. And once we learned a little bit about the parental experience, we realized that we also wanted to know a little bit more about what skills parents had to reach success. And we realized that very often parents in classes, for example, were working with mentors, but they didn't have an opportunity to evaluate that parent experience, and that wasn't typical. But without any type of evaluative tool or measurement, it was very hard for us to know what it was that parents' sign skills actually look like. Is it possible that we could get to a point of achievement? So we designed a second part of our study where we invited some of those parents who participated in the original survey and some new families as well to do some follow-up and to do some ASL assessment and some tasks to help us to understand their proficiency level. Now, this included two types of tasks. First, we were able to do a comprehension task where parents were doing some computer skills and we were seeing some signs, and then parents were looking at images and pictures and seeing if they could match that up to ASL terms and words. Secondly, we were looking at their signing expression, and we were seeing whether or not we were able having families video themselves, and we were sending them a prompt and asking them, to film themselves and submit those videos. Then we collected that information, those videos, and we were able to code them to understand their proficiency level. Now, we did need some type of tool to code that information and to measure their sign skills and their production. And we did do some pretty deep research, and we found the CEFR, which is the Common European Framework for Language. And one thing we found, and the reason why we liked that tool, is that it's often used for assessment in adult language users as it pertains to sign language. And so we took that tool and that body of information and we modified it for our purposes away from spoken language and used it for sign language in terms of expressive language. And we were able to utilize that tool. And that's essentially how our study was able to unfold.
Okay. Well, study and research. Now, can you tell us about, of course, the results, but identifying the study methods? Could you address those research questions, Amy?
Oh, this is Elana. So yeah, actually that was the fun part, right? In the survey, we asked families about their belief systems. For example, why did they choose to learn to sign? And within this group of parents and families who responded, we found that they were highly motivated and committed to learning sign. They shared different stories about their individual reasons, be it access. We saw that actually across several families, talking about access being afforded to their child among all family members. Other families talked about making sure that their child felt a sense of belonging and that they were part of the family. Those, I would say, were the two of the most common themes we saw. But yeah, I could stop there for now.
Okay. Anyone want to add to that?
Well, actually, so that was the initial belief systems, but then we also asked about their experiences and whether or not they face any challenges in learning, and what types of resources they needed to access to be able to learn the language, classes and the like. I'll say that their responses varied. Some of the parents mentioned that they were able to find the right class that worked with their schedule to allow them to learn ASL, but other families indicated that that was a big challenge for them, that there weren't classes offered in person in their local area, and or that some of the classes that they took would only provide them learning up until a certain ability, and that beyond that, they were on their own. Some families shared that time was scarce and that to carve out the time in their own schedules to pay for these classes with their own resources was a limiting factor. So that is possibly, those explain some of the challenges for the families we worked with.
Right. The challenge is always just how do we support the families, connecting them to the community and the purpose and needs of them, and really meeting them where they're at, making it as suitable as possible for the families themselves. Oh, yes. Would you like to add to that, Julie?
This is Julie, certainly. You know, oftentimes we see that among families needing to take classes, but finding those limitations. And so having to self-teach either through apps or other digitized versions. Those are one way though, right? When we think about early intervention services, occasionally they'll have the family sign language programs or sign language mentorships only go until the child is 3 years old, and at which point they age out of those interventions. And sometimes too, we see parents who are interested in taking community college classes, but again, this is their own time, their energy, their financial resources. They may have the motivation, but where's the systemic support for these families? That's what we're seeing missing.
Agreed. So that's where the community comes in with deaf mentorship, inviting them to events, really being that bridge and providing that additional support. Amy, did you want to add?
I did. One more thing that I think was really interesting, and we were able to survey parents and gather some information, is the first place or the first person that they were suggested to learn ASL from. And very often, the parents said that the first place that they learned about ASL was through their own networking, through their own research, through their own diving in to try to find some information. From time to time, it was early intervention providers, but very often did we see that families were given that information from medical providers or from doctors. ASL was generally not suggested. And so still that information is not widely disseminated in a proper way.
So that pertains to the next question here. Major findings and the gaps as well. So this next question again does tackle that. For families that are wanting to acquire American Sign Language, and then the policymakers in their decision making, what should they be considering when it comes to the research? If you could talk about the two, and anyone can chime in at this point.
This is Julie. I think that right now we need to look at the systemic support, policy level, early intervention, other ways that we can encourage language acquisition within the family natural setting. If it's we see what is out there for those who choose the speaking listening route, but we see less resources on the side of encouraging visual language communication. So we want to see professionals as well as families be afforded opportunities to learn and receive this training. Again, beyond the child's age of 3, the communication acquisition needs to continue beyond that. So I would say a big change that needs to come as an implication from our research is resource availability. We also would say that for any of these changes, that video accessibility needs to grow, and we can't expect these families to only learn in person. We see, and you'll see at the end of our webinar, a QR code pointing you to more resources, because we need to offer options for families to learn at the time that's convenient for them.
Elana or Amy, did you guys want to add to that?
Yes, this is Amy. I'd like to add that one thing that I found to be very interesting that we learned when we were measuring the parent skill level is that the parents very obviously had a range of understanding in terms of skills, but very often parents and families were reaching about an average of 1 or 2 years of American Sign Language. And so it made us consider and think about that level when we're looking at the CEFR. The scores were really meant for the idea that parents were having communication skills that were on par with communication skills. So when we're supporting parents at that point, one thing that's really important to consider is about the ultimate goal. Right? We're not expecting our parents to get to the point of maximum fluency of a deaf family or of a native signer that's been utilizing sign language for 10 or 15 or 20 years. Parents don't have to be afraid or have this apprehension from approaching American Sign Language because they have to reach this native-like fluency, right? That's not what we're ultimately looking for. Instead, really, we want parents to be able to have communication in everyday conversations and interactions with their children, and to understand that in and of itself is a process, and to recognize that those first steps are important, that it will take time to get to a particular place. But parents often, when we did the survey and when we were collecting this very important data, in these quotes from parents about their experience, they were actually quite powerful and compelling. How much they felt that sign language was very important and helpful in terms of their opportunities with their children to have full communicative access with their kids. And that was quite powerful to see how impactful it was to them.
You know, and this is Julie, related to skills, right? We're not expecting this fluency, this native-like fluency, but what we see from the study is that among the variability, there's still great opportunity. The use of classifiers, for example, we saw that skill being acquired within the families, and that opens up an entire world of communication and conversations that you can have with your deaf child just by mastering that alone.
Right. I think about my father. He's not the most proficient signer, let me say, but there are also no communication barriers. We can have a full-on conversation. So the ability to communicate, to talk about day-to-day current events, to talk about what happens within a family, and not feeling that barrier of, oh, I can't talk to my parents. No, I didn't have that as a presented issue. But I think often they're told ASL is too difficult to acquire. But no, this research shows that the parents can acquire the language and they want to. So what is the barrier? The barrier is the system in place, the policy not fostering this need and this desire. So I'm hoping that more research unveils itself to really foster that need. And conceptually speaking, you can learn sign language. You don't have to be fluent. And I really appreciate this research. All right, anyone else want to add before we dive into the fun Q&A from the audience? All right, are you all ready for the Q&A?
This is Julie. Actually, before we turn to that, just briefly, I'd like to say how much I appreciate this study because we've had a deaf hearing partnership among our scholars. And this goes back to back in the day when Amy and I were co-teachers. working in roles as peers to be able to leverage each other's strengths. And so I see that again, fast forward 25 years to this mixed methods approach. I was able to bring my strengths in qualitative work and Amy's in quantitative and get the best of both worlds again and again and again throughout our careers. That's what we see: shared perspectives, shared experience. I mean, really, that's the heart and soul of this study, is that two heads or more are better than one.
Really good point. Are we all prepared for the audience? All right, they have several burning questions for all of you. Okay, I guess I'll proceed here. First question, follow up to Elana or anyone else. What is the socioeconomic background of these families? As I think I saw, Elana mentioned some families struggled income-wise. Could you respond to that?
This is Elana, certainly. The socioeconomic background ranged among our population, but it was a little higher than average, maybe than it is typical across the United States. So we also saw that we lacked diversity in the racial demographic as well. It was predominantly white group of parents who were learning ASL and who responded to the study. So we do acknowledge that limitation, that this is not reflective of folks by and large.
Yeah, this is Julie. Also, we were recognizing that classes cost money. If you were attending a college level course, you also need childcare, and that's something to consider as well. And very often that's an experience that parents are coming up against, that college classes can be pricey, and considering who will be watching their children when they're away and the like.
Right, this is Amy. I think when we identify these barriers, I would think about the top three limitations being cost, access, and time. And so when we're thinking about supporting families, I think it's crucial that we consider these limitations and how we can lower that barrier to entry, making classes free of cost, maybe providing other supports to parents as they continue to acquire the language. We really must keep that in mind.
Okay, we have another question here. Now the question here asks, engaging the deaf community, how often can families obtain a deaf mentorship or learn about their own experience? Because so often that's a struggle. There's a lack of comfortability there in terms of engaging the deaf community. How do we engage ourselves and provide that support?
This is Julie. That'll depend on where you live. In metropolitan areas, we know that deaf schools and resources tend to be more concentrated in those spaces. But for those living in more rural areas, that will present more of a challenge, of course. That said, with technology, finding groups through Facebook, through finding parent support groups, different deaf organizations that provide support nationwide, NAD and its local chapters, there are ways that you can tap into what resources are in your backyard too, digitally speaking. That parent-to-parent support can't be overstated too, and just how important that is to really understand where the other is coming from, and creating these parent networks of camaraderie across the country too. Maybe even your local early intervention program can provide these kind of meetups for parents to support one another.
I agree. This is Amy. I'm thinking that now what we're all used to in this remote learning environment is that there's more opportunity for online learning. And I think that there's some effort that can be made even with deaf mentors that are available through Zoom or through different online portals where parents can sign up and have deaf mentors and interactions with deaf folks in other locations. I think that it kind of lowers some of those barriers for families and for parents who are living in those rural areas who otherwise may not have opportunities.
I think also one challenge is, how do the hearing families learn about the deaf communities? And vice versa? How do the deaf communities learn about the hearing families? They don't even know where to find us, and we don't know where to find these families without breaching confidentiality. So that's a challenge that we face. And I think that is something that we have to navigate. Again, that bridge. How do we bridge the two? Social media is one avenue, certainly. That's why I started hashtag why I signed. But there needs to be more practical means, other ways where we can establish these relationships, where we can share these experiences, because we're one collective team in a deaf child's life. But how do we provide that accessibility? And that's something we need to navigate. Okay, looking at the questions. Okay, what are your recommendations for deaf professionals who work with families who are hesitant to learn ASL because they are English as a second language learner and are intimidated by learning yet another language? So this would be a third language to them. What are your recommendations?
This is Julie. I think that what's most important is that you honor your home heritage language as you continue to pursue another acquisition. ASL is a very different language from English, and it's different still from others yet. So there's capacity there, I think, to continue to hold to your roots and also learn ASL. We don't encourage folks to privilege one over the other because that would engender disconnect among the family. The culture has to be the foundation. So we want to honor that and also encourage folks to consider that this is added to the buffet or the repertoire, not replacing anything that you already have.
Right, right. Oh, did you want to go on?
Oh, no, go ahead, Elana.
Yeah, this is Alana. There's so many ways to learn, right? And very often people acclimate different to different families and different language. Perhaps you have a college level access to English, but that might not be the best fit for you. But perhaps you work with someone in the home and you may be able to acquire ASL in a different way, utilizing a different approach in a more casual setting, for example.
Yeah, this is Julie. I'm part of family research planning with another research project. And in that, we're working on, again, honoring these families who need to navigate English, being English as a second or third or other language learners. And we're finding that in working with these families, that providing access to all the language actually is what is most successful for themselves as well as for their children. So considering day to day what that looks like, let's say mealtime, creating an opportunity for a visual language to be used because that is what is accessible to everyone. But when you are talking with another member of your family in private, you're able to switch to a language that just the two of you share. And the thing that we're finding most important is that when the child who is deaf is around in the space, that folks do honor the visual language that is being used in ASL in this case, because that is what's going to create the most access. Now, this also acknowledges that families aren't in their home 24/7, right? And that their children may have access to cochlear implants, other residual hearing, and hearing technologies. So if they're out and about in the public spaces, in church and meeting up with neighbors, we want the family to feel comfortable using any of the skills that they're learning.
There's an organization in California, and it's an organization that's spearheaded by the Latinx community, and they provide that bridge. So learning from each other, I think, is important as well. I just think there's insufficient access to those out there, but there are some. So again, deaf mentors that already have that multicultural background and can meet them culturally speaking, and then, of course, linguistically speaking. We have another question. Oh, I'm sorry. Amy, did you want to add?
No, I'll hold.
Okay. So how do you approach this question from families? If I agree to send my child to the residential setting at a deaf school, how will I learn to communicate with my child? So that's pretty much verbatim.
This is Amy. I think that is exactly the type of that's exactly what we really want to share with families, right? If you are sending your child to a deaf school, whether it be residential or not, they're being exposed to sign language all day, which is great. But families don't have to feel left behind, right? If families are making the commitment to expose themselves to sign language, it doesn't have to be a perfect formula, right? What can happen is that if families are finding ways to access sign language at the same time as their children, then parents and children can learn on the same trajectory. Now, sometimes what we hear is that families will say, oh, my child will, far surpass me in skill and they'll move forward and I'll be behind. But that's okay, right? Parents, again, don't need to feel that if you're not exactly on par with your child, that then you're failing them, or that you're not learning exactly at the same time. It means that that's not enough. It just takes time and you need to take the first step. And again, looking online, and hopefully what we dream is that many deaf schools will offer some support and some supplemental classes and learning for the first 1 or 2 years that children are within early intervention, instead of just focusing on the child, that they're focusing on the whole family with a wraparound type program. Like Julie and I have taught at the Clare Center, we visited families in the home to see what it is that they need. And very often families will come to us and we're able to have this interactive type social community that's being built. And in Boston, we have the Learning Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And that model is great, where parents are able to join in the classroom to see what children are doing, to see what playtime looks like, to see what activities are. And parents are able to be there and learn from the teachers and really gain a lot of support. It's a wonderful model that hopefully other schools are able to glean from.
Okay, we have several questions within one here. All right, first of all, they're just expressing gratitude. Thank you for sharing your work to make a difference uh, for our families and improving outcomes. What measures did you use to collect family beliefs and values, their experiences with learning the language? Is there a summary of your research that is appropriate to share with the parents of newly identified children that may reduce stress and barriers for parents as parents may encounter? So is there something that is synthesized, that is in document form? Is there anything that we can share? So let me rephrase that again. What metrics or what ways in which did you collect that information, beliefs and values, their experience with acquiring ASL, and then of course the last?
Sure, this is Julie. How did we work with their beliefs? We use a Likert scale. So we asked them to what they strongly agreed and strongly disagreed along that scale, asking questions about their feelings related to sign, like, do you believe learning sign is important for your child? Is a bilingual education important for your child? Is learning ASL for yourself important? And they would rate themselves along that Likert scale, rating from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So that's the measure we use to collect their beliefs and values.
Okay. And then language experience with acquiring ASL.
Sure. And so that was through a survey that we wrote with open-ended questions, asking them their reasons for learning sign, their goals for learning sign, and conducting that qualitative assessment there. Amy, did you want to add?
Sure. Elana, did you have something you wanted to add?
This is Elana. No, thank you.
Okay, we did provide families with a list of potential or possible where did you learn ASL ideas. We came up with some potential suggestions, whether it be college class, intervention class, with a deaf mentor and the like, so that they had something to start with. And parents could then go ahead and check off any places that they were exposed to ASL. But then there was also a place where they were able to put down other ideas. So we gave them a guide to start with. But we also, within the survey, we had any number of questions where we asked, within that range of places where they were learning ASL, we asked them which they felt was the most helpful of those resources. We also asked the parents and family members what types of resources did they wish that they had had that perhaps they didn't, or something that they wish that they would like to add in the future. So I would say that probably there was maybe 30 different questions to try to elicit that information to really help us glean more about their experience. Also asking when and how long they had been learning ASL. And I think that that was really helpful for us to allow us to realize that parents in their reporting had more resources than we thought when children were young. The first few years, as we said about early intervention, that there's several resources available that people were tapping into in terms of access points. But once children were reaching school age, around kindergarten and above, that those resources were really decreasing in number. And we're recognizing that that's really where the system is lacking, and we're having an imbalance of what parents are wanting in terms of access points above the age of 4 or 5, and above the age of 3 is where parents are not getting those free resources.
Right. At the end, you'll see a QR code linking you to two of the studies. We would highly recommend that you take a look and consider giving them as resources to parents. In fact, maybe our next studies will need to make sure we design them for parents. I like that suggestion that it's communicated in a public-friendly way.
Certainly, especially with those that are working with our families, engaged with early intervention. I think that's instrumental. I'm looking at the time. How much time do we have left? I think we have time for one more question here. So someone did ask about Maslow's hierarchy of need in terms of the research. Was that embodied in that at all?
This is Amy. No, we didn't use that specific framework within our research, but we did receive a lot of responses from families that obviously didn't learn ASL in isolation, right? It didn't happen in isolation. And it happened within different contexts, it happened within different communities. And so considering that many families were dealing with external stressors, right? In terms of, everyday stressors with having access to having busy lives. So we didn't have that direct framework, but I think that it's certainly something that we were able to consider in terms of their abilities to learn ASL. We're really dependent upon this larger global ecosystem that surrounded their families.
All right. One quick question. I think this has relation to what we've been discussing. So with this research, it's agreed children age out, and the parents are still struggling to acquire or maintain that learning of American Sign Language. How do we change that within policy, the community, et cetera? How can we change that? Where can we help parents continue that journey of acquiring the language to continue just connecting to their child? Do any of you want to respond to that?
This is Julie. I think of a few things. One would be, if a child is being educated at a residential deaf school, to continue partnering with the school to look for that support, partnering with the district, maybe writing it into the child's IEP, getting more support that's then becomes legally mandated for support services that are wraparound and therefore would be also covered by the district. It wouldn't be on the shoulders of parents to come out of their pockets. And then I would say at a higher level, really advocating at a federal level with Congress to change the policy for early intervention and family sign language access. There's a lot of work to do, but that can be accomplished on micro and macro levels alike.
Right, it's a bigger question to respond to, and one that we'll continue to work on in terms of coming up with the best response, but your continued efforts they're instrumental. That research is important to support the professional development, the community pushing for more research so this information is accessible. And I really appreciate your research, truly.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think that as we have opportunities, not just here, but as we gather more evidence that comes up within our research, that deaf children who are exposed to sign language from any number of backgrounds, it doesn't have to be from, learning from deaf parents, but rather deaf children are exposed to sign language, even if they're learning it as a second or third language. Really, it's all positive, and all of the evidence shows the benefit that the more research and the more evidence we can gather and provide for family members and legislators, which is our challenge, right? We need that evidence. We need this research to counteract the, any number of years and the myth that sign language or that parents aren't able to learn, which they indeed can. We know that that's an untrue fallacy, and that hashtag why I sign shows that, and any number of research shows that to be true. So we need to continue our plight to bring that information to the masses.
It's on all of us, right? To engage the families, to engage the professionals, etc. And I hope that we can eventually respond to all of these questions that were asked in the Q&A with all of your knowledge and expertise. My goodness, time goes by so quickly as we're engaging in really good conversation about important topics. So we have one more slide here. You guys, please take the opportunity to look at the QR code. This recording will be shared with all of you. And feel free to reach out to any one of us in the future. And thank you again for coming today. We so appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much.
All right, so Gallaudet University, Boston University, etc. You can see all of that engagement right here.